Welcome to English Literature for Everyone. Today we will start the topic on the construction of different Anne Franks by Andre Lefebvre. So, Andre Lefebvre was a popular literary author whose work specialized in the field of translation theory and comparative literature. He believed that the translation theory should be practical and come from experience of translating one language to another. Here I have added a quote by author which is quite appropriate to our topic. Writers and their works are always understood and conceived against a certain background, or if you will, are refracted through a certain spectrum, just as their works itself can refract previous works through a certain spectrum. So he says that a writer's work is like a white light, which, when refracted, reveals a spectrum. When we refract a white light through prism, we see seven colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Okay. Now, Lefevre compares this dispersion of light with author's inspiration. He says when you look closely at an author's work, you will see the influence of other people in his text, right? So, this essay was published in 1992 and was a part of a book called Translation, Rewriting and the Manipulation of Literary Fame. Here, Andre discusses how readers can see different versions of Anne Frank's based on the publishing house. So, rewriting and translation of Anne Frank's original diary help us understand the power and ideology of a nation and how that ideology influences the perception of a character. So now we'll start with our explanation. Lefevre states that Anne Frank wanted to be a writer. Her diary also serves as an evidence where she hopes to publish her work after World War II. For instance, Anne Frank had written a story, Katie's Life, that was about her father. It suggests that Frank had a keen interest in writing way before she realized that she would publish her diary. So, when Anne decided that her work would get published later, she began maintaining her entries in a notebook instead of loose leaf papers. Okay. And when Anne started writing with an intent to be published, she created a new version of herself that Lefevre calls Author Anne. Now, this author Anne gave a more polished description of herself by doing two types of editing: literary editing and personal editing. For instance, after complaining about her mother in her diary, author Anne writes, Anne, is it really you who mentioned hate? Now, there's nothing wrong with what Anne originally thought about her mother. However, she wants to appear as a naive, typical 14-year-old girl, and therefore she corrects her thought with this statement. Similarly, we have another example. Here, instead of saying, I sat almost in front of his feet, she says, sat on a cushion on the floor, put my arms around my bent knees, and looked at him attentively. Again, through this second description, she hopes to appear more polished and sophisticated. Now, these were the changes that Anne did by herself, which is quite common for an author to do to appear more pleasant. However, after she died, there were three types of changes made in her original manuscript. At first, we will understand the personal changes in her diary. Okay, so Anne's father, Otto Frank, reviewed and edited some part of the diaries where he removed details about certain people for privacy reason, omitted unflattering references to family members, friends, and relatives. Okay, and we'll take an example. For instance, certain details about bodily fluid, family fights, and a con that Frank family fell into were omitted. Also, as per her diary, Kitty, the name of the diary, was Anne's only confidant. So, editor also removed any conversation with her friends where she shared her secrets or any other imaginary name that she gave her diary during her early writing. All of this was done to maintain a consistent narrative of Anne and her sole confidant, Kitty, the diary. Now, let's understand the ideological changes made by the editors. To fit an image of a proper 14-year-old girl, Dutch publishers omitted sexual details within the diary, like description of periods, genitals, women's emancipation, and an incident where Anne was looking for another ways to know more about sex. Now, such details had to be removed on the request of Dutch publishing house. This brings us to our third type of change, sphere of patronage. Now, as I said, these omissions related to women's experience were made by the Dutch publishing house. However, if we look at the German version of Anne Frank's diary that was given to Anneliese Schroot by Otto Frank, we will not find such omissions. So now we have four versions of Anne Frank. First is the original Anne, second is the author Anne, third is the Dutch Anne, and the fourth will be the German Anne. Now, let's see how the German version differs from the rest of the Anne Franks. At first, Lefevre states that Schrute misunderstood some Dutch words like rot, which is translated as rotlich, which means reddish brown. However, the original meaning of rot was rotten. Secondly, Schrute states that while Anne's diary talks about atrocities of Nazi, she cannot keep any insults directed at German. See, the book German translation of Anne Frank has a target audience which was people of Germany. Therefore, Schrute had to tone down many of the insults and description of German people. For instance, while talking about the atrocities faced by Jews in Netherlands, Anne writes in her diary, one Jewish law followed the other. This was replaced in German translation as one dictatorial law followed another. Likewise, this statement, one washroom for 100 of people and there are far too few toilets, was changed into far too few washing facilities and toilet available. Now, these changes were made so that the German audience could read Diary of Anne Frank without feeling directly attacked. Another change in German version include making Anne Frank more ladylike. This phrase, laugh until I get bellyache, was changed into laugh without a care happily to make Anne more acceptable to 1950s audience. Also, Anne Frank had a unique way of narrating which Schrute did not replicate in the German version. We will understand this with an example. Children walk from their cold home to their cold street to end up in even colder classroom at school. Here, Anne wanted to make her readers understand the situation of Holland during Nazi rule. She basically states how these small children had to face cold, harsh weather with hunger and constant threat of war. Now, Schrute translates this statement as children walk from their cold homes to their wet, windy streets and they arrive at school in a damp, unheated classroom. This statement, while depicting the truth, does not create a powerful impact on readers like the original version. Also, we have another example. We were as quiet as a baby mice is converted into we were very quiet. You can understand how the German translation lacks Anne Frank's creative writing style. Now, Lefevre concludes this essay stating that the version of Anne Frank we see is constructed by ideological, poetological, and patronage consideration. As I stated earlier, the girl Anne Frank created author Anne Frank who wanted to get her diary published, thus creating two versions of herself. Other edits were made by based on the personal preferences of Otto Frank and patronage restraints of Dutch and German publishing house. In Dutch version, the very curious essence of a teenage girl is missing. Meanwhile, in German translation, the omission of cruel treatments by Nazi, which destroyed her as a person, are also missing. Therefore, it is really hard to put who actual Anne Frank was. With this, we come to an end. Thank you for watching. Hope you like this lecture. If you need any explanation on a new topic, do let me know in the comments below.